Okay, I'm sharing my screen. I am calling us to order at 6:49 Mountain Time. I'm going to text Rob. So what I would like to do before we take attendance is do public comment if there's any, to give anyone who might be held up with Zoom updates a few moments. So if anyone has any public comment, that would also include committee members who may have something to say that doesn't necessarily fit in the agenda, just raise your little yellow hand and I will call upon you. And let me just text Rob right now. And I'm also going to text Mike Rufo. Okay, Mr. Madden, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say really quickly that I wanted to note the increased attendance for this meeting. I just want to share my appreciation to everyone who is around. It's always good to have more attendance in more committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madden. I firmly agree. And we have Rob now. We couldn't start without Rob. Okay, Madam Secretary, if you would like to take the attendance, and just note that Mr. Sazelski is on vacation and he told me he probably would not be able to be here. You're muted if you think you're talking, Madam Secretary.
Okay. Arrowwood present. Bracco?
Present.
Okay. Nicholas Sazelski is reported on vacation. Harlos?
Present.
Latham?
Present.
Martin?
Present.
Molman? Ken Molman? Tom Rowlett?
Here.
Mike Rufo? Mike Rufo? Mike Seebeck? Mike Seebeck?
I'm going to text him as well because that is highly unusual.
All right. Of the alternates, Chuck Moulton, number 1.
Here.
Okay. Rich Tomaso, 2. Rich Tomaso. Okay. Dave Roberson
Here.
is 3. Fine. Greg Deal is 4. Greg Deal. Roger Roots. Roger Roots is 5. Data Logan is 6. Data Logan.
Here.
All
Data.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Dean Rogers. Dean Rogers. Madam Chair, we have 3 alternates present right now.
And how many primaries?
7. We have Sazelski out. Molman did not report, and Rufo and Seebeck.
Okay, if none of them come, then all 3 alternates will be set as voting members. I will alert you if I'll do an admittance from the waiting room for any additional primaries. The next thing, and unfortunately, I neglected to stick the link into the agenda, which you should be seeing on your screen, but it was shared on the email list, if I'm not mistaken, and those were the draft from the June 15th minutes. Were there any corrections to them, Madam Secretary?
Not that I received.
Did anyone have any corrections to those minutes?
No, but I didn't review them, so I'm going to abstain on this vote.
Okay, I'm just looking to see if there's any other hands. Well, I'm going to ask if there's any objection to approving the minutes, with everyone being advised, like if later on you see something, we can always revisit the issue. Committee minutes are a bit more informal. So is there any objection to approving the draft June 15th minutes? They are on Elpedia. And because they were there, I had a little bit of a brain burp and didn't stick the link in this agenda. Okay, seeing none, those minutes are approved. Next, I'm kind of springing this on you guys, Mr. Latham, and I am picking on you. Is there any update from the rationales subcommittee, or are you guys waiting a bit longer?
Speaking for myself, I'm waiting.
And remind me again who's on that committee. It's yourself.
I believe it's also Mr. Bracco and Mr. Moulton.
Okay, Mr. Seebeck was not?
I don't believe so.
Okay,
I could be wrong.
I'm just so used to Mike being on everything. Okay. And just now, since remember, my plan is to be pretty much done if we go and look at the timeline. And actually, let's look at that a second, since we are just reviewing. And alternate Dean Rogers is being admitted, Madam Secretary. So looking on the screen, we are on like line number 15 here. It's a bylaws committee meeting. We're looking at another town hall sometime. That actually be soon. When was our last one? Was maybe in August. It's not really following the quarters, but we'll have another one soon. But if you see, I am hoping to have our mostly final proposals done by January 24th to send a survey out to membership by the end of the month. So we are now nearly halfway through our time. So I do think it's time probably that the rationales committee start looking at some of them. We've passed quite a few proposals, but I'm leaving that in your capable hands, Mr. Latham. But just to put us all as to where I'm looking as far as time wise, you might think the convention is a year away, but remember, we're thinking of having a mock convention, not an entire one, to run these bylaws proposals by members. So most of 2024 is going to be finalizations and refinements, and hopefully not many new proposals, though I certainly can't prohibit anyone from doing that. Would hope not, because we would have had a year's worth of meetings. Okay, let's go back to the agenda. All right. Where we continued was amend that whole major rewrite in our rules for allow, and it's not really bylaws 10.7. I do not know why it says that. It's actually a bunch of rules. And last meeting, if you may recall, I thought Google lost our changes. No, they didn't. I just had them in a different part of the document because the document was so long, because I was showing you my work. So I'm going to pull up, after I extracted out everything that did in fact show our changes. So you should be seeing it on the screen. This is the proposal markup. Now that we went through how I got there, we will need to add in between what my input, Mr. Latham's, and then whatever the committee has electronic balloting after this. So don't have that idea in your head yet. We had already agreed we could revise this without having to reconsider when we stick in electronic balloting. So I'm going to scroll through here. This is stuff that we have gone over before, but it's been a couple weeks. And we were completely getting rid of Rule 3 and combining everything about balloting into a new Rule 3. which is everything in blue. Nothing was added. Everything was taken out of the various places where it was scattered throughout the rules, put into a logical order into one rule. And here is where it was all taken out of these weird areas, which we need to do the same with nominations, but I didn't touch that yet. But I also listened to the recording. I believe this is all of our changes. It was just in a different part of the document that I got confused last meeting.
All of that,
Mr.
that door
Bracco,
alarm going off.
Mr. Sally, you're not muted. Please mute. Okay. Mr. Bracco.
I think Rule 8, Section 1. It's like the tiniest typo.
Let me see.
The N, the capital N in nominations, that should be struck, correct?
Yes. Took care of that. So the point we were at was to give everyone time. And I actually think cosign should be hyphenated. Am I correct on that? Anyone have thoughts for a hyphen right there?
Yes, my thought is yes, hyphenate.
Okay. So we are at the point now where further amendment would be in order, though we did spend a meeting amending it to this point. But the next vote, if there are no further amendments, is to adopt this conditional upon the fact that we might have to tweak a tiny bit for electronic balloting once we have a proposal for that. So I'm giving you all a moment. Mr. Bracco.
Just a question on the intention here. So if we were to pass this and pass electronic voting, would they be treated as two separate proposals or one combined proposal?
We are passing them in our records as two separate ones. But remember that how we pass these has no bearing or little bearing on how we present them. We will be doing separate votes on potentially combining proposals. That's all going to be part of the ordering process. So, because we have a lot of proposals like that, where we have like 3 proposals to one section, and at the end, we will need to make some tactical decisions. So in our committee records, it will be shown as 2 separate proposals. That might not be how we present it to the delegates. We're going to have some meetings, and those will be in 2024 after we've done all of our proposals. A lot of strategic decision making. And that's what 2024 is mostly going to be dedicated to. Interfacing with the members and strategy. Dr. Moulton. You're muted, Dr. Moulton.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm not sure. It's been a few weeks, so I'm not sure if I made this amendment yet. So I apologize. Let me know if it's duplicative. But in Rule 3, Section 2, I would like to amend where it says, after the secretary or tellers have recorded all delegation submissions, the state-by-state delegation totals for each candidate or choice shall be displayed on a projection screen for each delegation. Instead of, I want to strike out displayed on a projection screen for each delegation, and I want to replace it with shared with each delegation. So in other words, I don't want to bind this to a particular technology. If people want to keep doing it through a projection screen, that's fine, but I want to enable the secretary, if the secretary chooses, to share a Google Doc or something like that with delegation chairs.
Okay, what I'm highlighting is what I heard. You let me know if that's correct. You would, I realize each delegation here, but I'm just doing it so we can understand.
Right. I would say shared with each delegation,
Okay, let me
but
just,
I guess with two doesn't matter that much. With seems more natural to me, but I mean, in two. is fine.
I'll make it with, that's what you moved. Let me just shared with. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I do realize each delegation is in there twice. And when we actually, if this passes, do the markup, I'll make the markup a little cleaner. This at least though, lets us know what we are working on. Would you like to speak further to that, Dr. Moulton?
Just real briefly, whenever possible, I think our bylaws should be high level, should not bind us to a particular technology. The technology we've used historically, at least in the past, I don't know, 15 years or so, is to put stuff up on a projection screen. That doesn't mean it's necessarily the best technology going forward. And I think we should allow our secretary and just our officers in general to communicate that in whatever manner that they feel and the delegations feel is most effective.
Thank you, Dr. Moulton. Mr. Bracco?
So my reading of this, each delegation, would sharing it only with the delegation chair qualify?
I realized, I'm sorry. Miss Dr. Moulton, if you'd like to answer, Mr. Bracco, I messed this up here. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So you should have be shared, I guess. It shall be shared with each delegation. But yeah, it could be delegation chairs, or it could be, I guess, all the delegates. I think I'd feel more comfortable if it was available to all the delegates to look at rather than just delegation chairs.
Yes. So
but-
with that in mind, I'd actually like to make an amendment then
Sure.
to strike the word delegation and insert the word delegate.
Okay. I am going to do this way. I'm just gonna. And Mr. Mullman will be coming in once I let him. Whoops. What did I do? No, that was correct. Let me let Ken in. I want to strike that. Strike through. And you wanted to make this. I'll take care of that strike through. And I'm going to make that purple. Okay, so Mr. Bracco in the amendment is amending the amendment to strike the word delegation and insert the word delegate so that if we accept the amendment to the amendment, the primary amendment will be shared with each delegate. Is that correct, Mr. Bracco?
That is correct. If you'll allow me a moment to speak for
Yes,
this.
please.
I think that if I don't have a problem with the idea of not binding us to a technology, but I do think that we should explicitly say that in whatever way that this is going to be shared going forward, it needs to be available not just to the delegation as some sort of nebulous body from each state, or I guess 51 nebulous bodies, whatever. It needs to be available to every single person who voted. So I think that having it be delegate rather than delegation would require that.
Okay, thank you. I was next in line, and I'm also going to put myself in line as well for when we get to the next level. I am not in favor of the amendment in general. However, if the amendment in general were to pass, I like it better with Mr. Bracco's change. I'm not going to speak against the primary amendment because we are not there. I'm just noting that out of the choices, I think Mr. Bracco's makes it better. However, even after amended, I'm not in favor, but I will deal with that once we dispose of this amendment. Ms. Arrowood. You're muted.
The motion to strike progression screen has already been made and passed. I don't remember the exact wording we inserted, but that motion was definitely passed.
I don't believe so.
I can remember typing it up. That's why,
We moved it.
okay,
We moved it from one place up to here. So if you go down here, one moment, and Mr. Seebeck is entering. If you go all the way to the end, you will see it used to be in a rule by itself,
oh, okay,
and we struck it from there, but we moved it in its entirety in a logical place up here.
okay.
Is there any further debate on the amendment to the amendment? And to be clear again, the amendment to the amendment is to strike the word delegation and insert delegate. So if passed, the amendment would be each candidate or choice shall be shared with each delegate instead of shall be displayed on a projection screen for each delegation. Ms. Arrowood, did you intend to still have your hand up? You're muted.
I was trying to lower it.
Okay, I can lower it for you. Mr.
Oh, thank
Seebeck.
you.
Yeah, just saying I got here. Apologies for being late. I was working late and just finished dinner.
You're
But I
not
won't-
allowed
I
to
won't-
eat. I'm eating right now. Apologies.
Well, considering I'm overweight, that's probably a good thing, but what you call
You're
it, I
not
will
overweight.
vote-
You're pleasantly plump.
No, I'm overweight. But in any case, I will not be voting on this because I don't know what we're talking about. So I'll jump in after that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Seebeck, though you might catch up along the way. So, I mean, it's totally up to you. Okay, I'm going to ask, is there any objection to the amendment to the amendment? All right, hearing none, the amendment to the amendment passes. So we are back on the primary amendment as amended. So let me just get that on the screen. So this will say each delegate. Okay, so I was next in line to now speak against the primary amendment. The default is going to be what's in a rule. Remember, this is a rule, not a bylaw. So if some secretary had a wild hair and wanted to do it differently, they can ask for this rule to be suspended. The fact is that Roberts, for motions and the like, requires things to be projected on a projection screen. We are always going to have that projection screen because of that. So we're already tied to that technology. It makes no sense to me to have every single motion up on the screen, but not be required to put vote totals on the screen. And I think it's pretty exciting when you're going state by state by state. And as long as the secretary isn't over eager or blacks out that last column, you don't get to see the total result until everyone has looked at the counts. And it makes for really good C-SPAN. When you're sharing it just to somebody's computer, it does not have that same excitement factor. And also, it requires delegates to have some kind of technology that can view it. We will have technological errors. People will be raising their hand, saying Google's giving them the spinning beach ball or whatever program we are using it. Projecting it on the screen has one point of failure, and the secretary has a dedicated internet connection, unlike the delegates. So having it be in a rule doesn't mean that you can't share it with each delegate if that's really what the secretary wants. But if we change this, it will end up not being projected on the screen, because then it will be, oh, we just have to share it with each delegate. And I want the default to be the excitement factor, because it still can be shared with each delegate. Nothing is stopping the secretary from doing both, and nothing is stopping the chair or the secretary or anyone else from making a motion to suspend the rules and do it differently, because it already is a Google Doc and it would be relatively simple for the secretary to do that. So I'm completely against this. It's worked perfectly well for many years. So as far as I know, forever. Well, as long as we had projection screens. But anyway, that's all I have to say about that. I think Dr. Moulton's hand was up first, and then we'll go to Mr. Latham and then Mr. Martin.
So first of all, if this change were passed, the secretary could still put things on a projection screen. This wouldn't prevent them from putting on a projection screen. But I do take issue with the notion that it's worked perfectly well for years and years. What I've seen is that it slows things down for quite a lot of races. And time is very precious at conventions. So people may decide that it's faster to get things verified simultaneously all around the room, rather than to go state by state by state, slowly scroll and verify. I agree that slowly scrolling it makes for good TV, especially for presidential votes. But for votes that are not big TV, like at large, LNC, Judicial Committee, I would rather save some time so that that time could be allocated to other things. And this would free the secretary's hand to potentially save some time. Projection screens have existed since long before computers, but now we have computers, we have internet, and in 10 years, there may well be technologies we haven't even thought of that are better than both of those things. So I don't think we should tie ourselves down to 30, 40, 50-year-old technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moulton, Mr. Latham, and then Mr. Martin, and I've also got back in line. Mr. Latham.
Yeah, it's just a question, parliamentary question. I did look through my PDF, old PDF 11th edition of Roberts. I didn't see the word projection up there, so it might be described in a different way. Was just hoping for a reference to where this is called for in the
Sure,
parliamentary procedure.
And I know Mr. Jacobs is here. I can visualize the language. It says that every motion has to be read in full, including strikeouts and whatever, very tediously, or alternatively be displayed. So I might have shortcut what I had to say, unless we want to read everything entirely in such a tedious manner, it needs to be displayed. And I don't think it says projected. I think it says displayed. I would ask Mr. Jacobs if he has that reference handy. In the meantime, I'm going to be pulling up my Kindle version to see if I can find it. But while we're doing that, Mr. Martin.
I will be looking it up, but I'm only familiar with it being stated by the chair. Let me check.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
It gets confusing.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I find your argument persuasive. In something as important as this, relying on people's cell phones full of malware and whatever, and all that stuff could be kind of dicey. I think there's also something kind of attractive about having one screen that everybody's pooled in on, and as far as older technology, I've been trying to bring back fax machines now for a long time. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I'm trying. I think it says display. Well, it does talk about display of motions. The recording secretary shall designate an online area, so that could be not a projection screen, exclusively for the display of the immediately pending question and other relevant pending questions, and to the extent feasible, blah, 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 shall cause such questions and any other documents that are currently before the meeting for action or information to be displayed therein. But 1 second, let me see here. It's a video display. I know it is in, the text of the pending question is properly displayed. Mr. Jacobs, did you have something to add?
Well, the only thing that I'm seeing is dealing with the handling of a motion, which would be section 4:15. And it talks about the resolution being read, but not necessarily being displayed.
Yeah, I might have to, because there is something I'm visualizing that I haven't found yet that is in there, but I think the ones I read even it talked about the display. Now, I suppose we could interpret that to mean display on a Google Doc as well. And I could have been reading projection into it. I can tell you that's always how Colorado interpreted it and the way we have nationally. But looking at the text, it probably could be reasonably interpreted to mean such as a Google Doc. Did that answer your point of information, Mr. Latham?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, so we're back in line. I was back, then we had Mr. Molman, and we had Mr. Seebeck. I'm going to try to not be repetitive, and let me also put this screen back up. I don't think this saves time whatsoever. The secretary already has to have a Google Doc. It takes no time to display it. Meanwhile, I remember when we tried to do that online convention. Everyone accessing that Google Doc kept crashing my Google Doc over and over and over. And then you had people who just didn't understand how to do it. I'm not going to name any names, but I'm on a committee where there's even someone who doesn't know how to access the Google, like doesn't understand the concept of a Google Drive at all. And I say this in love, and obviously everyone knows this is a joke. There are people who object to using, right now we do use Google, because they believe they're spying on their every move, such as Star Child, who would rather we do everything by sundial. I am joking in love, Star Child. I love you. So to insist that everyone use a certain technology, you're going to have a libertarian who's going to have a problem, a philosophical problem with whatever technology it is that they're forced to use. Their phone runs out of charge. It won't refresh. It is not going to save time. The minute you delete this from the rule, the default becomes sharing. To say that nothing is stopping the secretary from putting on the screen, that's absolutely true. But then they're not required to. And we could be scrambling around while they then get it displayed. Meanwhile, there actually is nothing stopping them from also sharing it, but we already have the lower technology default of projection. I don't believe in fixing things that aren't broken. There's a lot of things broken in our bylaws, including all of this crap about balloting being in a million different places. My idea was to try to make as little substantive changes as possible. And I have a feeling this whole display, not display is going to waste a lot of really valuable debate time and perhaps torpedo this entire thing. But that's me. And I'm just speaking as secretary. I like the language as it is, but the committee's going to do what the committee's going to do. Mr. Molman, then Mr. Seebeck. Mr. Molman, you're muted. Did we lose him?
Detail.
Oh,
Thank
there you are.
I'm here. Yes. Yeah, so I apologize for the delay in arriving. I actually just passed out after work, and I thank those that sent a few text messages to prod me into being awake. The point, I guess, of all of this, right? I think fundamentally, we're discussing this amendment, and when I arrived, we were tweaking this amendment first. I mean, fundamentally, what is the philosophical difference here? On one hand, we have a rule that unless suspended is what is followed. On the other hand, we have, in my mind, a question of would it be done any differently, or is it necessary to require a rule where common sense, in theory, should dictate otherwise? And I just wonder, and I'm not saying anything with anything that anybody's proposed here now. I'm saying that in the past, the existing status quo system, are we already being too verbose in exactly how things have to happen? Are we limiting? Certainly, we want the tally to occur. We want the results to occur. But are we being overly restrictive by outlining the particular mechanism and saying this will be the way that we do this thing, rather than, maybe there is a better way, maybe some cool technology comes along, whatever. And I think very much about the electronic voting stuff and the fact that the way it is worded, having been on the convention committee in the past, it pretty much requires you to use Scantron. And it pretty much, there's no, talking about filling in bubbles and signing paper ballots and computer read and blah. Anyway, long story short is that what we want? Is that, do we want a system that very rigidly outlines and handcuffs the abilities of modern technology, of what's available, or do we want language that simply ensures that the tally is accurate, correct, that every delegate has the opportunity to challenge the results if they feel like their result was not properly, if their vote was not properly counted, and that we come to a decision and we move to the next vote? I personally think it's the latter. I'd like to see less handcuffs, and I certainly don't believe that anyone would intentionally choose, even if they were free to choose any system from scratch today. I don't think the presidential tally would change very much unless there was some way to draw it out even more, because that is the time that the media actually pays attention to what we're doing, is during that presidential vote and that tally. You shorten that window, you shorten our earned media. So it would be extraordinarily foolish to reduce that part anyway. But I will also tell you that pretty much nobody outside of the convention hall or at least the party really cares who the vice chair is. And so we really don't need to go through and wait. I mean, gosh, the tally for my race took a while because it was an issue and whatever, and it was fine. But the reality is that it's not good TV. Like, nobody out in C-SPAN land was like, damn, I'm sure glad that Kim Ullman guy won for vice chair. Whew, man, that was close. No one cared. And so that's all I guess I'm getting at, is that less handcuffs may result in the same results where it matters, and easier results, easier processes where it doesn't. I'm going to shut up now. I've talked too much.
Mr. Seebeck.
Well, I'm sitting out here on the porch watching the fireflies, which is nice and peaceful, but I look at this and I see a major problem. By changing the wording to shared with each delegate, that doesn't take the handcuffs off. That actually makes it far worse, because I could very easily see troublemakers on the convention floor literally saying one at a time, show me the results, show me the results, show me the results, show me the results, and slowing everything down to a dead stop. The projection screen does a mass display for everybody at the same time and prevents that. I don't think this is broken. Let's not fix it till it is.
Thank you, Mr. Seebeck. I was also starting to think that, like what we saw with one particular delegation purposely slowing down a vote because they didn't want to get to an item of business later. This is a perfect opportunity to do that again. Again, it's not broken. The secretary has to do all the exact same work to have a spreadsheet. It causes more work in the second thing. And again, whatever the language is going to be the default. And there will be somebody who won't display perhaps on the projection screen. And I think everybody's seeing it once. But also, listen, libertarians are suspicious. Some people may actually ask, how do I know I'm seeing what the people over there in California are seeing? How do I know it's the same? Libertarians are so freaking paranoid, and I love us for it. But when everyone's looking at the same thing right in front of them, it undercuts all of that. I would implore the committee not to look for problems where we don't have really any, because there are a lot of problems in our bylaws, and I just don't think this is one of them. Trying to lower my hand. Is there any further debate or amendments? Okay, there is obviously differences of opinion, so I am going to ask the secretary to take a roll call vote. What we are voting on is striking displayed on a projection screen for each delegation and inserting shared with each delegate, so that if passed, the entire sentence will read, after the secretary or the tellers have recorded all delegation submissions, the state-by-state delegation totals for each candidate or choice shall be shared with each delegate to review for accuracy. A yes vote will change it to shared with each delegate. A no vote will retain displayed on a projection screen for each delegation. Madam Secretary, if you would please take the roll.
All right. Arrowwood, I'm going to say yes. Rocco,
No.
Moulton, Chuck Moulton, Dr. Chuck Moulton.
Yes.
All right. Rob Latham,
Yes.
Frank Martin,
No,
okay. Ken Molman,
I'm going to abstain on this one.
all right. Tom Rowlett,
Yes.
all right. Dave Roberson,
No.
okay. And Mike Seebeck.
I would say no.
All right.
Madam Secretary, if I'm correct, it looks like it's 4 yes, 4 no, and one abstention. Is that what you show?
Yes.
Okay, so it fails as a tie. I am not going to be voting. It's not necessary. So let me get this format. Okay, we are back to the primary bulk amendment here. Is there any further amendments? Or are there any further amendments? Because this is such a big change, I'm not going to do this without objection. I am going to ask for a roll call vote on these changes that we've been workshopping for a couple of meetings now. What alternate, Mr. Madden, the secretary will, because Mr. Madden was asking in chat, no, all alternates are not currently seated. I think just Dr. Moulton is for Mr.
Oh.
Rufo.
Madam Chair, Dr. Chuck Moulton is in Mr. Sazelski's place right now.
Okay, and Mr. Rufo's not here, so who's the next alternate?
Dave Robertson.
Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Mr. Madden. Okay, if you would take the roll, and what we are voting on is passing this entire group of changes with the understanding that we might have to tweak some of the language a bit depending upon an electronic voting proposal that Mr. Latham has. Any changes other than things having to do with electronic voting would require reconsideration. Those would not, we had already agreed upon that. So, Madam Secretary, if you could take the roll.
All right. Arrowwood, I'm going to say yes. Rocco,
Yes.
Moulton,
Yes.
right? Latham,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Molman, Ken Molman,
I'll vote yes.
Tom Rowlett,
Yes.
okay, David Robertson,
Yes.
all right, and Mike Seebeck.
Yes.
All right. Madam Chair, we have 9 yeses and 0 nos at this point.
Okay, this passes. I will not be voting. So yay, we worked hard on this. So next is getting to, one second here. The electronic voting. And I believe this is Mr. Latham's latest proposal here. Is this your latest one, Mr.?
Yeah, I believe so. I looked at the top, and 6th substitute is what I have, is the
Okay.
most recent.
Yes, that's what I have on the screen. Now, I do have a question for you before you move this. Because we are dealing with ranked choice voting later as a separate proposal, did you want to reserve changing this, which I'm highlighting right now, not using ranked choice voting until we get there, or did you just want to put it in there now? I just wanted to alert you to that. It's totally up to you.
Gosh,
And
I'm
same
really
thing here with the single transferable.
Right.
Just so that we could deal only with the subject of electronic voting and not, but it's up to you. You can
Mhm.
stick it in here now, but I tend to think it probably belongs with the other one.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to reserve those.
So what I'm going to do is highlight these, and everyone just ignore that. And it kind of narrows it down, and I will add that. We might even get to your ranked choice when this, oh, what did I do wrong here? Okay, there we go. Okay. So, just to explain to everyone where I think we're at, and then I'm going to let you explain it and move it. We did not do anything with this language that's now in red because we knew we were going to deal with it in this proposal. That right now is still in our rules. This thing that Mr. Molman mentioned before that actually would require a Scantron. And Mr. Latham has a different proposal that would change that. So now I'm turning the floor over to you, Mr. Latham, dealing with here forward.
Right. So I hope it's fairly straightforward, but the bottom line of this proposed rule is to just give our party the capacity to use electronic voting for our internal elections. And I think we can use them in both, ranked type situations and non-ranked type situations. Obviously, if to use ranked choice would make it quicker. I do have, we did talk about that language in there about doing it in a way that it generates, well, I don't know if we actually did that. Yeah, the physical ballots. So we, that's in there again, just to kind of build trust in this kind of system. Although I'm neutral on that too. That's not a deal breaker for me. I just think while we are getting used to electronic voting, it ought to be accompanied by, just a physical record as well. So that's it.
Okay, I'm going to read this out loud because sometimes reading things out loud gives you a different perspective. And sometimes you can go, oh, that sounded weird. So it would be to strike in cases where computer readable ballots are used, each delegate must sign the ballot and submit it to the delegation chair after verifying that the number of votes cast does not exceed the number the state is entitled to. The chair of each delegation shall submit the ballots to the secretary. And it would instead make that section read as follows. Electronic voting may be used instead of manual tabulation by affiliate delegation, provided that written notice of the electronic voting system to be used is published on the party website at least 90 days prior to the regular convention. A delegate or alternate must be physically present to cast an electronic ballot. The electronic voting system must provide for the following. A, accommodate each voting delegate's or alternate's ability to cast sub-point 1, a vote using a computer readable ballot, or 2, an electronic vote which generates a physical ballot, and which ballot the voting delegate or alternate gives to the respective delegation chair for placement into a designated envelope provided for this purpose. The system generates a report of votes by affiliate delegation for display to the convention. The system allows delegates to cast write-in votes. And if a recount is successfully ordered, the recount must be done using the physical ballots collected by the delegation chairs. I have some comments and I might want to pull up where I took my notes. But first, some more substantive than others. First of all, I don't think it's necessary to say delegate or alternate. When an alternate is seated for a delegate, they're a delegate. So I think that's overly just not, we don't talk like that anywhere else. So that's easily taken care of. Where I have an issue is an electronic vote which generates a physical ballot. I think that's going to severely slow things down because you're going to have printers that then it gets identified with the delegate, and who's pulling it off the printer might get to see how the delegate voted, and it could violate the secret ballot because it has to be handed to. I just see all kinds of problems with that, and I see it as a big slowdown. I get the trust factor, but what I favor is at the same time as they are casting the electronic vote, they physically fill out their own ballot and give that to their chair in an envelope. I think that'll be faster. And I think it will broaden the range of possible programs we could use. Because I just see this as really narrowing the range of what we can actually do. And that this will be more of an idea that's like kind of in the rules, but will never be used because it'll just be too complicated. I think the low-tech solution, I know concerns were raised that someone could cast an electronic ballot and then do their physical ballot a little differently. all kinds of weird things can happen in convention. What really is the motivation for someone to do that? I don't see some big game being played with that. And I think the benefits that I brought up far outweigh the issues. So before I yield the floor, I want to see if I covered everything. And I had notes. Let me go here to proposals, because this has been a minute since we looked at this, and it was proposal P. Proposal P, I think this is, let me look at it with titles. Proposal P. Maybe I didn't. I thought I had. You had it all rolled into RCV at one time, didn't you?
I honestly don't know. It's been a minute.
Okay, yeah, it's been a minute. I don't see any notes, so I think I covered my concerns on this. I don't know who was first, so I'm just, since everyone gets to talk, I'm going to go Mr. Bracco, Mr. Martin, then Mr. Latham. Mr. Bracco.
So, one small question, then maybe one bigger one. In 6A, the new 6A, I guess, in the center column with the markup, it has two subsections, but in the right column, it does not. The proposal is the markup column, correct?
Mr. Latham, I think you probably just forgot to fix the third column because this is the sixth rewrite of this. So am I correct in telling Mr. Bracco it's that middle column that we're looking at?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The other question, based on my reading of this, it seems to allow either paper ballots or electronic ballots at the delegation level. Is that correct?
Can you repeat that again? So
that you can either use paper ballots or electronic ballots, but that decision is made at the delegation level. So it's not necessarily the convention is all one or all the other. Each delegation could be different.
that's not my intent. My intent would be to have it standardized across all delegations, all delegates.
Yeah, and I don't think it reads that way. If I may answer just as the chair is a point of just parliamentary inquiry, I guess, in a sense, or information. There is a choice here, but the choice isn't by delegation. Option A1, a computer readable ballot, that's pretty much talking about something similar to a Scantron, which would be a paper ballot, but it also gets counted by a computer. Or A2, which is strictly on your computer, but they either, my idea, they handwrite one or somewhere something is printed, but everyone will be using A1 or A2. There won't be some using A1 and some using A2.
So I guess within the body of 6 itself, not A or where it's subsections, it says electronic voting may be used. So it's sort of like it can, if you wish, provided it meets the 90 days on the party website, all that stuff. How is that decision made in this framework? What, because they're still, like, you're not disallowing written ballots.
It says instead of.
But should the word, instead of it being may, it shall be used instead of if it meets these requirements. Is that?
Well, what if it fails?
Well, then it wouldn't be, presumably. Like if you notified 89 days. Nope, too bad, written ballots.
No.
Right?
Okay, let me just, I see what you're getting at, and I'm trying to get us to a solution because I do think you're identifying a valid problem, maybe. If we put electronic voting shall be used instead of, what if proper notice is given 30 days before the convention, the company for which notice was given goes out of business? Do we then have to like amend the rule?
Well,
or,
I mean, wouldn't we have to suspend the rule?
well,
Certainly.
yes, but the shall there, I think, complicates things. I think perhaps what you might be getting at, Mr. Bracco, just to put an idea in your head, is is somewhere in that notice thing to say, I don't know. I don't think the answer is making it shall. I do understand your concern to make it clear that this decision would be made by the Convention Oversight Committee or somewhere. It's not made at the convention. It's made 90 days before by somebody. I don't think we need to say who makes the decision. But I think what you're getting at is to make it clear that whatever is decided, everyone is using it. To me, I think that's the flaw you've identified.
And how, I think there's a bit of how that decision is made as well. And I think it's a complicated question. And given that I don't want to make any sort of amendment at this time, but I did want to bring it up.
Hope you guys forgive me 1 second, and then I'm just going to yield. Just because I've been secretary and I've been on Convention Oversight Committee, I see a member comment that says may be used at the COC's discretion. The COC is not a committee that's specified in the bylaws. It might not always be called that. We might not always have a Convention Oversight Committee. FEC rules allow you to farm out the planning of a convention where you have different fundraising limits, and we've done that in the past. That's the way the 2008 convention was done. So specifying a specific committee is just not a good idea. Plus, convention rules are not binding outside of the convention. Well, the 90 days kind of would be because it would have had to have happened before. I don't know, maybe it could be, but you start getting weird there if you're going to start specifying who makes what decision. That probably needs to be in the bylaws or in the policy manual. I don't think you need to say that here in a convention rule. Who makes the decision, I really think is not relevant in my opinion. That's an LNC COC level decision. Just like it doesn't say in our bylaws who decides where the convention's going to be. Like we don't, that's just way too much. But saying that everyone has to use the same system, I think that is valid. And I think that's an LNC policy manual thing. And we just let the LNC COC worry about that, just like we do. Let them worry about where the convention's going to be. I am going to shut up now, and we are going to go to Mr. Martin, Mr. Latham, Mr. Molman, and then Mr. Bracco, if you have more comments after mulling that over. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do think that just reading this as a delegate might, we can anticipate the question coming up of who makes the decision, and that people will attach significant importance to the answer, to getting an answer to that. The same thing really applies to the items 3 and 4 here. For elections, not using what kind of voting and all that. How is that decision made? I mean, it certainly is something I'd like to know, and I would want to know before I voted. So anyway, I guess that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Molman.
Yeah, I think my gut tells me that this is another case where we're being overly verbose, and I get it. I still think the ultimate check and balance on all of this is a mechanism by which the delegates have to accept the mechanism of electronic voting. That if the delegates have to vote first, the old way, traditional way, to adopt electronic voting as a means of voting in this particular convention, that inherently that will ensure that any system is meeting the needs of the delegates, right? That the delegates agree that this is a good system and this is what we want to do. That in that scenario, leaving that open, so not specifying that it must have printed ballots or must have generate a ballot, not having it so that how it's being read out, any of that stuff, right? That can all be left up to the LNC's committee, right? The LNC, the COC is really acting on behalf of the LNC per the policy manual. They're a subcommittee that acts on the behalf of the LNC regarding convention things. So it's an LNC thing. And then it's left up to the delegates to decide, yep, we agree, this is what we want to do, or no, I don't trust this, and I would rather, do it the way we've done it in the past. I think that could just be made a lot shorter by doing something where at the very beginning of this, right after the number 6, saying something like, upon majority vote of the delegates to do so, comma, electronic voting may be used, ... And you can get rid of a whole lot of other stuff about A and B and all of that, because that would be part of that system that had to be published 90 days out, that the COC or whatever they're called, or if it's just the LNC managing it, would have had to have prepared ahead of time and published. I think that makes it a lot simpler, and it provides that flexibility, but with the check and balance that they're not cramming some system in that delegates are going to walk away going, it was rigged, because they got to decide what system they're used to vote. So that's just my thoughts. I'm not making a motion at this time, but that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Molman. Mr. Latham?
All right, appreciate all the comments. No, I like to think all the concerns that have been raised are fixable and addressable. I agree with the whole thing about getting rid of alternate. I just didn't know if we needed both, so I was over-inclusive rather than under-inclusive. That subsection A2, I just wanted to mention. So, I mean, we could get rid of that electronic vote, which generates a physical ballot part, just the second part. Person could take a ballot selfie, but then what you would lose is auditability. Whereas a Scantron ballot in A1 there, you're maintaining the option of auditability, and 2, which generates that physical ballot, gives you that. But if you just do a ballot selfie, then you're losing that. And you could lose the rest of the language there as well if you wanted to. But again, I'm amenable even to just dropping that level of detail as well. Again, the reason I think there's more detail rather than less is to address the concerns of those who are skeptical of electronic voting. I did want to mention, well, let me go back to, yeah, we all want to question the motivation of why would someone vote electronically and then fill out a physical ballot in a different way. Well, of course, there's human error. Then, there's also monkey wrenching and just mischief making that I think happens as well. So that's why I would just rather have an electronic system which spits out something, and yes, it would require, possibly printing or something else. But we don't have to do that. But if we want to have an auditable election, it seems to me that would be necessary. The write-ins, if some people had questions, by the way, that just I think our parliamentary authority requires that if we're going to use electronic voting. The shall issue, and I'm open to changes on that. I want to give people options. So I'm worried that by replacing may with shall, people are going to feel like this is being forced down their throats. And I think my intention here is just to put it out there as an option that can be pursued. I know Mr. Melman suggested something about upon a majority of the delegates, then electronic voting. But if you look at the timeline, we want to make it work. So how are the delegates going to vote, prior to the convention, and then give 90 days notice prior to the convention? So it seems like that would need a major rewrite. And then I believe Mr. Martin's just question on who makes the decision. Yeah, I would think it ultimately, like the rest of our rules and bylaws, it's ultimately up to the convention delegates. And I know on items 3 and 4, we decided to just put that off, but I think that would also come back to the convention committee. And then, of course, beyond that, ultimately the delegates to decide whether you were going to use various electoral systems to elect, to populate various bodies. So I hope that covered the first round of comments and questions. But I'm open for more if they're there.
Before I call Mr. Roulette, I'm going to ask the committee members, please do not be asking questions of the person speaking in chat. This was the ruling on a point of order before. You can't call the question in committee. So every single one of you will have the opportunity to ask these questions on the microphone. Mr. Roulette.
Just real quick. I think that there's a 4, which should be a 7, just to the numbering. If a recount is successfully ordered, the rest of that, the number before that is 6. It should be 7. So that was it.
I actually think it's supposed to be D.
I looked at it and I don't think it's part of the ABCD section. I think it's part of the larger section. I could be wrong, but it's not 4.
Mr. Latham, is that D or 7?
Oh, great question.
Let's have an hour's worth of debate over it, please.
Let me tell you why I don't think it's 7, because it doesn't apply to numbers 1 through 5. It only applies to number 6. And that's why I think it's D.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I think it should be D.
Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Roulette. Okay, I had myself and then Mr. Mulman again. I wanted to answer some of the questions of Mr. Mulman the first time around. I do think Mr. Bracco and Mr. Mulman made good points that this somehow has to be accepted by the delegates and it needs to be made clear. I'm not so sure it needs to be accepted each convention, no. Remember, you're also dealing with the secretary having to prepare. And I can tell you even something as simple as at the in-person part of the 2020 convention, where they decided they were going to save time. I love that on the floor. And by love, I mean hate, because it never works. Of having multiple rounds for the secretary race by using approval voting. And we had to switch all the spreadsheets around and all of that. During the audit, it was determined it would only have been 1 round anyway. So it was completely unnecessary and took the tellers who were trained already. It just was a nightmare. The secretary needs to know what we're going to be using and not have it be amended and changed and debated at the beginning of convention. That's just not workable and will make people hate electronic voting. Until we have done it at multiple conventions, delegates are not going to trust a system proposed by an LNC that doesn't meet certain minimum requirements right off the bat, because it's a check on what can even be proposed. So I won't vote down, probably. I'm not going to promise, like if I were the deciding vote, something that didn't have that, but I do think it's a fool's errand not to, because people remember, no offense to Mr. Ferreira, but they remember the way Porcupine was attempted to be shoved through. There's lots of distrust of every LNC. And I'm usually the leader of the distrust, even when it's an LNC that I'm on, that there has to be some kind of minimum requirements. I do think in some way it's kind of silly because other organizations have been using electronic voting for years, but we haven't. And every time it's been proposed to the delegates, it's been shot down. And I think we need to learn from those lessons and put these guardrails up. And the time to make it a little less verbose and complicated will be after we've done it successfully a couple times and trust has been built. So I guess that, one other thing. I'm just going to answer the question in chat just because it was in there where Mr. Bracco had asked, how is auditability, whatever, I can't pronounce that word, and electronic mutually exclusive? Because the whole idea is that people don't trust the electronic. They think that ones and zeros got switched somewhere along the line. And auditing what already went up on the screen calculated by a computer. You're just auditing something that got changed in the computer. You need something that's independent of the computer for there to be true auditability. So that's how they're mutually exclusive, at least right now in the philosophical mindset of the party. And I know what else. I know where my notes were. My notes were actually at the bottom of the major rewrite, and I do want to pull them up in case there was any issues that crap, this thing is long. But I wrote 24 pages. What the hell? Okay. Yeah, here's what I had put, and this would be number 7, whatever. I had suggested this, and I'm not moving a substitute. I just want to put it out there. Electronic voting may be used instead of manual tabulation, but this is the same, and then it changes as we get down. And this is a little simpler. By state delegation, provided that written notice of the voting system to be used is published on the party website at least 90 days prior to the regular convention and must include provisions for the following. A, contemporaneous manual ballots are completed and turned into each delegation not chair and placed into a sealed envelope and delivered to the vote tellers. B, a report is generated of votes by state delegation for display to the convention. C, delegates may cast write-in votes and must be present in the convention hall at the time of voting. And 9 should be D for the same reason I said before. If a recount is successfully ordered, the recount must be done using the physical ballots collected by the delegation chairs. I think this does the same thing, except for it might disallow scantrons, which Mr. Latham's does allow. But I can tell you a scantron system, which the only reason we were even considering that before is because that's all our rules would allow. Mr. Molman can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was going to cost like $40,000. So I really don't care if this disallows scantrons. It's really old technology. If we want to move to electronic balloting, let's move to like actual electronic balloting and not taking an SAT test. But after all discussion, I am considering moving this as a substitute because I do think it's simpler and says the same thing. In order to keep things in one place, I'm just going to copy this over like onto another page here, just so that we have it. If we want to look at this in the future, it's not being moved. It's just there for notes. Okay, I believe Mr. Molman was next, and then Mr. Latham again.
All right. So I think we're, Ms. Harlow's, Madam Chair, we're pretty close. And I should note, I think the Scantron option, the absolute cheapest I could get it. I mean, we looked and looked, and it was, the cheapest was going to be about $20,000. And that was, again, there's no guarantee that the delegates would choose to use Scantron. And I do think that, in keeping in mind that this is a rule, right, that delegates could still vote to suspend the rules or to amend the rules or to do all the things if they don't like what the LNC or its designated body comes up with. So even if you try to say, well, the LNC is just going to decide and they're just going to do the thing, the delegates still will have the ability to overturn it. And if you want to guarantee something's failure in the LP, tell a Libertarian they have to do a thing. That will pretty much guarantee that they will say, no, I do not have to do a thing, in fact. So I guess what I was getting at with what I was talking about was, if we had the language about upon a majority vote of the delegates to do so, comma, You would then go to electronic voting shall, right? Because upon the majority of vote, right? So the delegates have to vote, and upon doing so, electronic voting shall be used. I would keep the language about provided that the written notice of electronic voting system to be used is published on the party website at least 90 days prior. And that's important because that means that the LNC or its designated body has thought through the process, has come up with a system, has a plan. They're going to have to, even if it's not a $20,000 Scantron, they're still going to have to evaluate what tabulation software or what tabulation provider as a service is going to be used. They're going to need to test it. They're going to need to make sure that we don't have a critical failure that we had with previous attempts, because that was a critical failure that basically was an issue of at scale, right? It worked great when it was 100 people voting, and it fell down on its face when it was 1,000. And so all of that stuff has to be taken into account. It does need to be published 90 days out, so the delegates can also think about, is this what we want to do? Because if you want to ensure or help ensure failure, you would spring it on delegates at the last minute and tell them they must do it. Like, that is not going to end well at all. My concern with the extra wording is exactly what we have here, the situation we have now, which is, I'm sure in 2012 or 14 or whenever that was that they put the Scantron language in, that was, oh yeah, that makes sense, and that's what we'll do, and we'll make sure that we have this very locked down. We're going to use Scantron, and we'll start using it, and then once people get used to it, whatever. We've never used it. Like, they used it, I guess at the 2000 convention, I saw a video where someone who was seeing impaired or sight impaired was like asking how do they vote because they couldn't see. And that was my takeaway from that. So I think this is worthwhile. I think it is important that we move the party forward, that we vote faster, but that we do everything we can to maximize delegate buy-in, to maximize delegates going, yeah, okay, I can go for that. And also, as Ms. Harlow, Madam Chair, has correctly outlined, it has to be done ahead of time so that the secretary, the tellers, everyone running the logistics also has time to prepare. So I do think the 90-day deadline is absolutely critical. Not just for delegate acceptance, but because the people who are going to be doing the work, the awesome volunteers that make the convention go, aren't trying to figure out on the floor, okay, what am I doing? What are the rules of this election? Huh? That's not good. So that's all. I do think that there needs to be something about the delegates have to choose it to use it, and it will definitely help this measure pass. It'll definitely help it be used in the future, and it will inherently eliminate some questions about, oh, the LNC is just trying to screw us over and they're trying to ram this thing down and blah, 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 that we hear every convention. So that's all.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to interject here just one moment for housekeeping as chair, in case it entered anyone's mind to say, well, we can make it so that it can't be suspended by putting this into the bylaws instead of the rules. I just want to head that off in case anyone was thinking that. It doesn't matter where this is located, it's still a rule. If it's stuck in the bylaws, it would be a bylaw in the nature of a rule of order, and it would still be suspendable. This is where it belongs, just in case anyone was thinking that. Second, looking at the time, we have a half hour left. How I think this is going to go is that we're going to continue debating this for a half hour. Mr. Latham already posted a 7th substitute, but he might actually come up with an 8th one after 30 minutes of discussion. I don't think we're going to get to a vote this meeting, and that's okay, because this is super important. So that's kind of the way I see things going, but other people could extend time. Who knows? Maybe we will pass something tonight. Just wanted to say how I saw things going. So who I have on deck is Mr. Latham, then Mr. Seebeck, then myself, then, well, Mr. Roulette removed his hand. Mr. Latham.
and I was hoping not to create an 8 substitute, but it seems like, who knows? It's like saying Beelzebub. It may just come into existence now. I also just wanted to echo Madam Chair's point on auditability, and I think maybe even a more specific concern of mine is what's been talked about in the electoral reform community, voter verifiability. So meaning each voter who participates in the election can access the cast vote record and see whether it matches, if they do the math themselves, if it matches the reported results. And so I would hope that if we do a version that generates either all computer readable ballots or electronic votes, which generate a physical ballot, those can be, scanned somewhere, available to anybody who wants to analyze them. And then you would hope that they would, if they analyze it, it would match what was reported at convention. And then just, I know some people are suggesting various fixes. I mean, the approval of delegates, I'm fine with that. Just I would invite people, if they have that thing, or just kind of the who decides stuff, propose some language. Tell us where to put that stuff. And I'll just, because Madam Chair, kind of previewed her substitute, it does have that language that I just, again, think is problematic, because it has a delegate do an electronic vote and then generate a separate physical, ballot. And then we're just opening up to the potential of human error, mischief, monkey wrenching. So that's my concern with that.
Mr. Seebeck, and thank you, Mr. Latham.
Yeah, I look at this from a software engineering perspective and from the Transparency Caucus perspective, and I really don't like it. The idea of having an electronic system that does not have proper development and vetting and aid and security checks and all those details is a non-starter. We have enough technology inclined people in this party that it should be very easy for us to crowdsource at the very minimum, a review process for this type of technology, or maybe even grassroots develop something that can be brought into play, field tested. That's a key point, at various conventions and such across the country over time. Training delegates up on it so it will work correctly, but also make sure that it has the proper design and security to make it happen. In the absence of that, and we saw this, they tried to pull this in 2010 with the early voting booth ideas that went down in flames. Porcupine was a great idea in 2018 that just wasn't quite ready for prime time. Personally, the system we have right now, yeah, it is a little slower because of what we have with the index cards and the tallies and so on, but it is auditable, it is verifiable, and it is pretty transparent. If we were to make any change to that system, I would suggest we go to a system where our ballots are those triplicate carbonless systems where you have the pink copy, the blue copy, and the white copy, and then you have a double counted system for each of two of the copies, and the delegate keeps the third one for an audit trail. Again, that would you still got to count everything. You still have the paper balloting versus electronic, but it would add an extra layer of receipts and security to the system. Lid, shut up. I'm talking. We have.
Smack him, Lid.
She's out of order. I have the floor. We have the ability to do this if we put our heads together with the brain thrust that we have within the party to come up with a workable solution. But we're not there yet. And the system we have in the meantime does work. Yeah, it could be faster, but it works. Rather than try to put this in now, let's come up with something outside of this to make this worthwhile amendment, to make it worthwhile, to make it a good endeavor, to say, hey, yeah, now the time for this has come.
Thank you, Mr. Seebeck.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr.
I
Molman?
have a point of inquiry or information. However, Mr. Seebeck used 3 words in a row to describe a system. One of them was auditable, and I missed the other 2, but I wanted to write them down. I didn't know if he recalled the words he used there.
I believe I said verifiable and secure, but you would probably have to check the recording later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I had myself up next. I liked, and we might have to go back to the recording to hear it, Mr. Molman's introductory language about the delegates approving. The way he worded it, I thought was very good. He didn't mention this part, but I think he also then intended to get rid of these sort of specifications, which I would not be in favor of. I'm in favor of his having the delegates have to pass it, because then the secretary would know and can prepare for either. But and I'm saying this as someone who's been on the LNC for since 2016. I don't trust the LNC without parameters. They porcupine, again, no offense, but the way that got to be rammed through has soured me completely on not giving parameters for what must be included before it could even be considered. Because I'm going to give you a scenario. Say you have an LNC that, you know, good faith, bad faith, whatever it might be. Okay, as I often say, rules are made for bad people, not good people. So let's assume we have a just completely horrible LNC, completely corrupt, horrible LNC. And they just happen to have a large following that they get to convention and just want to rig a bunch of stuff. They could really plan that by not having any parameters. The delegates voting for it is not any, it is some guarantee, but just ask people how they feel about the deletion of the abortion plank. And, you know, it wasn't a guarantee that that was the will of the party. It's when you're dealing with a democratic system, there's inherent flaws in that. You have to have some guardrails up. So I think there has to be parameters in these rules. Or the delegates aren't going to go for it. But I do like, after further thought, Mr. Molman's idea of having the delegates vote for it. But let me throw something else out there, and this kind of deals with some things that Mr. Seebeck said. Yes, our system could be faster. There is one way to make that faster. It's not something we can put in our rules, but I could just tell you it's something that I am going to be doing for 2024, is you need more vote tellers. And that system is something I've been learning. My first year being convention secretary was 2020, and that was not normal, you know. And then I allegedly wasn't secretary in 2022. And I'm just going to let you know, no shade, Mr. Seebeck can vouch for this. When I showed up at convention, there were no vote tellers, except for one. That entire teller team was mine when I wasn't even secretary. 2022 could have gone down in flames if I decided to have been a terrible person and said, ha, sucks to be you, and went and sat down and just folded my arms and said, that's what you get for removing me. But I didn't, because I wanted there to be a good convention. Most people did not realize that was a teller team I trained. I learned a lot on that. We need twice as many tellers. And that will speed things up considerably. Problem is, sometimes volunteers don't show up, but I can tell you, I'm aiming for a teller team of about 20 this time. So that also will speed things up. And I'm going to put that in the secretary's manual. I have written a secretary's manual for the first time in party history, and I will be putting all these things we've learned in there. So that's kind of dealing with some of the things that Mr. Seebeck said. If we don't do electronic, it is going to be faster no matter what in 2024, and agreeing with Mr. Molman. Mr. Roulette. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, one thing. Mr. Latham said this. In 2022, no, in 2020, there was a bit of a controversy over my race with Evan, where some people said that I counted my own votes, which I absolutely did not. Mr. Seebeck can testify to that. I saw the results when everyone else did. But I did scan all of the delegation sheets, and I did an audit of those votes on video and broadcast it out to YouTube so that everyone saw the post-convention audit. And I was actually shorted 5 votes, I think is what it came out to be. But I think that also, I'm going to stick that in the secretary's manual as well, that the audit should actually be recorded, and maybe the secretary appoint a team of people to audit. And those scans of all the ballots, the sheets at least, should be available to every party member to do their own audit. I absolutely agree there. Okay, now Mr. Roulette.
Yeah, 3 things. First, a point of parliamentary inquiry. If I like this or don't like it, and later on I want to move to reconsider, is it in a committee? Do I have to be on the losing side of the vote there?
You
Is
mean
that how
the
that works?
winning side?
Okay, the winning side. So
No, you only have to not be on the losing side. So unlike boards where you have to be on the winning side, on committees, there's no time limit for reconsideration, unlike boards. And also you only have to not be on the losing side. So an abstain would preserve your right to reconsider.
okay, good. That's good to know. The second thing, this says electronic voting may be used instead of manual tabulation. That's how it begins. I assume that means may be used only instead of manual tabulation. In other words, in an event where you would not be manually tabulating, you could not use electronic voting. For example, when the chair says, does the convention want to do this or that? Raise your hand, and oh, that looks like 2/3, and somebody says, no, I don't think it was 2/3, and then they have to do a counted vote. So it's only for stuff where you're manually tabulating. It's not, it can't save time from anything that's essentially not a race for office, because that's the only time when we write down our votes. Am I correct in that?
Yes, because this is under a section of the rule called balloting.
Okay. And the second thing, kind of riffing, or not second, but third, riffing off of Mr. Molman, maybe we could have electronic voting be the default, but we could put a section in here, like just write a section that says at the beginning of the convention, like we'll say after the credentials committee, we can take a vote about whether or not we want to do it the old way. I don't know. Actually, as soon as I said that, it kind of sounds like a bad idea, but but
That happens to me all the time.
yeah. But I like having electronic as the default for like 2026, but then having people be able to, a majority of the convention be able to opt out of it and say, oh, no, we want to go back to, well, hell, I don't know. Yeah, maybe not.
I'm just laughing because that happens to me so much. Something sounds really great in my head, and the minute it comes out my mouth, I'm like, maybe not. Okay, I had Mr. Seebeck and then Mr. Latham. Mr. Seebeck.
Madam Chair, just to confirm what you were saying earlier about what happened with the audits and so on, I would also add something else, and this is a suggestion for your secretary's manual. In Reno, when the tabulations came up for the Judicial Committee, I recused myself from the teller team because I was a candidate in that race. I would suggest adding into the secretary's manual on this that be the case for any other tellers or similar volunteers where that comes up. It's just better optics at a minimum.
Mr. Seebeck, shoot me an email after the meeting and I'll send you over a copy of the manual. And you could take a look at the sections on conventions because you might see things I neglected
Okay.
to put in it. Just remind me though, or I'll forget to send you the manual, but it's always a
Well,
work in progress. So I'd love for
I'll
you
take a
to
look at
review
it.
it.
I'll take a look at it over the long weekend.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Latham.
Sure, just riffing off of kind of prior comments, and again, that's why we have that 90-day thing there is for one reason. If people see that there's going to be a problem, then they can organize to be addressing it at the convention. And on the software question, so I'm definitely not a software expert, but I am aware that there are some requirements out there to require open source software. And I believe a vendor, I think OpaVote is an example of a solution out there that is open source. So, it meets kind of a transparency objective, and that could be an option, and my concern about doing it internally, I think we had that history of the porcupine. I think we also had people, there were optics of kind of self-dealing, like, somebody in the party offers to do it for a certain amount of, money. And I think some people consider that kind of suspect. So, there are so many solutions out there now. So the wheel's kind of been invented, and I just worry about trying to reinvent, even though we may need a custom build for our convention, depending on how this ends up being worded, because I don't know that they would have them out there that would both do the electronic version and then also again generate some kind of paper ballot as well. So I did just want to throw that out there. And I don't object to requiring open source if that's a concern of folks. And that might solve some concerns there.
And this is only tangentially related. It's just I'm throwing it out there in case somebody thinks this is terrible. And also for Mr. Seebeck to hear this. I'm also, we're not following Roberts in some things. Ken, you're going to kill me for saying this, and Angela will kill me for saying this too. Unless it's not at all close, all bylaws votes are supposed to be counted votes. The chair is not supposed to eyeball it. It's in Roberts. I've surprised Richard Brown by giving him the citation. I'm actually putting in the secretary's manual that the tellers also count, so that there's people ready on hand, so that the chair's not asking for volunteers of people who might not know what the hell they're doing. That there will be tellers assigned to certain sections, and they'll know how to do a counted vote. Mr. Molman.
So since you mentioned that, and we have a tradition of doing the opposite, can we write some language that would address and codify our tradition to override what would be the most tedious process in the whole wide world?
We could, if you wish to, but that would
Okay.
that would be required. I actually like counted votes for bylaws. Bylaws are super important. If it's not close,
They are.
it doesn't have to be counted. And a lot of times it's not, but otherwise it's supposed to be counted and recorded in the minutes for posterity. And we did it in Colorado, and it did not take a long time when you had experienced counters and they were assigned to very discrete sections. It went very fast.
But if I understand correctly, you're saying that we have to have, by the letter of Roberts, we have to have counted votes for every single bylaws vote.
Not amendments, the final vote.
Okay. Okay. So the main motion.
The one that requires 2/3.
Right. So, and I guess that makes sense in a way because of the 2/3 nature, but
unless it's obviously not close.
Is there something already there about it? If it's obviously not close, we don't have to?
Yeah, it's in Roberts.
Oh, okay. Then I don't care anymore. Okay, thanks.
Okay, we are at 8:34, but I don't think we're anywhere near ready for a vote. What I'm going to suggest, and I'm going to ask for Mr. Latham's input here. I know you put up number 7. I haven't looked at it yet because it requires me to go to my secretary email box, and it's full of confidential crap I can't put on the screen. So I don't want to accidentally switch screen. You might be happy with number 7, but after additional comment, maybe you want to put up number 8. I would suggest we take this up as the first order of business next meeting with incorporating all the feedback. You posted on the list, maybe there'll be even more feedback on the list so that I actually think we can get to a vote to this next meeting. How does that sound to you, Mr. Latham?
And just to, I think I'm on the same page, but just that new version. So the 7th substitute would be what we're working off of,
Right,
unless
so far, right.
in the 2-week interim, I guess more good ideas get thrown into the chat that I want to add.
Yes. And there's something I want to throw up that came out really badly for the committee. I am not going to be available on July 13th. So I'm going to leave it up to the committee whether we want to take that week off or whether we want, I just will not be here and Mr. Molman can chair that meeting since we will be dealing with the electronic voting. Or we could put that to the 27th. I'm leaving that up to the committee. So I am going to make a proposal and you all can vote how you wish. And my proposal is going to be that we skip July 13th. That is Freedom Fest. If you are curious why I'm unavailable, where I'm helping with a couple booths at Freedom Fest. And I might actually be available on the night of the 13th, but you know how those festivals go. It may not happen, and this just happened. So I'm going to make a motion, and I don't want the committee to feel obligated either way. Vote how you wish. But I am moving to cancel our July 13th, 2023 meeting and having our next meeting be July 27th. Yes vote would cancel it. Things proceed as normal. A no vote would, well, first let me ask Mr. Molman, are you available on the 13th?
That is the best question of all. Let me double check.
And are you comfortable with the way I have the Google Drive system to be able to navigate it and all of that, since I've been handling most of that?
Yeah, I think that will be fine. I mean, essentially, and kind of how this has all been going, if we were to finish the motion that's on the floor currently and begin the next one, that's about as far as I would expect us to get in that call, unless the next one is like a slam dunk easy one.
It's not. Let me show you what's coming up. We have electronic voting, and then we have add RCV for party officers. If for some reason both of them got through, I would ask that you please don't do any of my next 2 when I'm not here. And then would be where they won't get as far. I think the RCV one would last a while, or we can take a week off. But are you available? Because I think the committee needs to know that.
I am checking that right now. I have, unfortunately, 4 different calendars, which makes my life awful, that I have to keep track of, because Microsoft decided that it's not good to let people download their calendar except in their own app.
And what I will say is if the committee votes not to cancel and you are available, if I can make it, I will. I'm assuming I'm not going to be able to.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks as though I am available. I have nothing on those dates in my calendar anywhere. So that should be fine.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to cancel the July 13th, 2023 meeting. I'm going to ask the secretary to take a roll call vote. I hope I'm not speaking for Mr. Molman out of turn. I won't be offended no matter which way the vote goes. And I doubt Mr. Molman would either, but I'll let him speak for himself. But you heard the reasons and you see what's coming up. So it's entirely up to you guys. So, Mr. Molman?
I was just going to say exactly. I have no feelings either which way. I would say that if we do have the meeting, if we get through what we're working on, and if we get through the next thing, the ranked choice voting, if we got through all that, I would probably move to adjourn early and just call it a day, because the next things up are for Ms. Harlos, and if she's not there, it'll just cause chaos. So we would just get through one or two things and be done, if we even got through those, which I we might get through what we're working on right now. So, but I'm up for whatever, guys. I don't care.
And I really do want to be there for the next one, the ethics, transparency, and accountability one.
Yeah.
So, I would, if we got through the other two, and there was an adjournment, that would be fine with me. Mr. Bracco.
Yeah.
So if we were to have the meeting, it would be in order to amend the agenda and switch some things around, because looking down towards the bottom, I think there might be some proposals. I think specifically, is my opinion, AA and BB. Those I think are probably fairly simple. So if we were to have the meeting, maybe we could knock those out. I don't know what your comfort level is with your BB proposal being talked about there.
I want
just
to
a
be
thought.
here for any proposals I make, but I think BAA could certainly probably be disposed of relatively quickly. I don't remember what the status language is. Let's look up this. I like the description. Remove status language. Let's see, Mr. Latham. Oh,
There's a joke about,
state chair or state delegation, delegation chair or affiliate delegation. I'd be fine with that being heard as well. So I can put out an agenda that moves the order around a little bit. Madam Secretary, if you would take a vote, again, a yes vote would cancel our July 13th meeting, which is during the week of Freedom Fest. A no vote would keep it scheduled with the understanding that Mr. Molman will be prepared to chair. However, if I can make it, I will, but I think that's highly unlikely. And I'll switch the agenda around as we talked about. So, Madam Secretary, if you could take that vote.
All right. Arrowwood, I'm going to say yes. Rocco,
No.
Chuck Moulton, Dr. Chuck Moulton,
No.
Rob Latham,
I'll abstain.
Frank Martin,
Yes.
Ken Molman,
I'll say no. I'm willing to do it. So.
okay. Tom Rowlett,
Nope.
David Roberson,
Yes.
Mike Seebeck,
Forgive me, what are we voting on?
A yes would cancel our July 13th meeting, and a no would keep it on.
Abstain.
Madam Chair, so far we have 3 yes, 4 no, and we have 2 abstains.
I'm not going to vote to cause a tie, so the meeting will not be canceled. And I will try to make it if I can, or at least listen in a bit if I can, and I'll rearrange the schedule to avoid the things, that we all kind of agreed upon. And if I have any thoughts on the RCV thing, I'll put my thoughts in an email, and I trust that committee members here will take my thoughts into consideration during debate. So unless I don't think there's really any reason to extend time, but somebody could if they want. If not, we are going to be adjourned exactly on time at 8:45 Mountain, 10:45 Eastern. Do not see a motion to extend, so we are adjourned.